All right, picking up where we left off. All thoughts must be written or drafted in complete sentences, no fragments or run on sentences. This requires that you have used all resources available to you to ensure that grammatical errors, syntactical errors, etc., comma, semicolon use, other punctuation based uses do not result in sentence fragments or run on sentences. Long story short, I cannot reteach some of the basic elements of grammar. Instead, I can point you to resources that can help if it's been a while. It's not lost on me that many of you haven't had an English class or a grammar class in quite some time, if at all. So just make sure that you reach out and tap into the resources that you have if you are completely lost. Do not let there be a stigma with self-disclosing that you might not be sure. It's okay. You would be surprised the amount of PhDs I work with who commit atrocious grammatical and syntactical errors. So just let me know. I have resources, books, articles, etc., that I can point you to help you to make sure that you don't commit these basic errors. Of course, in going with the last bullet point, must adhere to correct grammar, punctuation, and syntactical rules. Along that line, make sure that you do not use any contractions. Always spell out every single word that also goes to abbreviations. Make sure the first time you are referencing an abbreviation, you spell out the complete term and then put the abbreviated version in parentheses thereafter. And then each subsequent use or referring to that particular abbreviation, you can go straight to the abbreviation. You don't have to spell it out. So it's just important to note that you have to always spell out the full version upon first mention. Must adhere to more complete sentence structures, or more complex sentence structures. We have discussed this via the formula I just presented. I do not intend to say that every single sentence of your content has to be in this format, but the vast majority should. Your writing and content should show this growth from simple sentence structures into more complex sentence structures, housing more complex ideas. You should not have any series of short sentences, which is read as if they are chunks of material. The chunks and the short sentences inhibit the flow of natural ideas and and thus your credibility as a researcher, because you don't have the ability to wrap them all up into a more complex sentence structure. Another of the biggest that I see, biggest issues or writing nuances, as I call them, is most incoming graduate and professional writers will start sentences with vague terms such as this, that, these, those, or it. And this level of academic work or research content, make sure that you do not start sentences with these vague terms. And conversely, make sure that you refer exactly to whom or what you are referring with as much specificity as you possibly can. So that's just another point here. You can always use various synonyms or words. You can use probably the most used circumventing variable of this particular element, which is using such. So instead of these variables, such variables, or instead of it is common knowledge, such common consensus. So there are some tips and tricks. Again, you can see this by referring to already published material to make your life easier. This is huge. Make sure that you create a variance in the way you cite your sources. Do not always include just an in-text citation at the very end of your sentence. In fact, the standard at this level is to maintain a 50-50% balance of attributing, which is citing at the onset of your sentence, as well as in-text citations. The goal is to vary the way you're citing so that the chunks of in-text citations do not impact the natural flow or style of your writing. So you always want to make sure ensure there's a 50-50% balance. Ensure regular and block quotes are formatted according to APA manual. This is another something that's commonly missed. So if you are directly quoting material, make sure that any quotes of 40 words or more are formatted according to block quote format or long quote format per APA standards. It looks completely different in your document. The way that you include the page number and punctuation at the end of that citation is different. Make sure that you understand 40 or more words is a different format of directly quoted material. That can be huge and impactful. Ensure to follow appropriate seriation rules. Seriation in APA refers to the levels of headings. There are typically 5 to 6 heading levels. You have L1 through L5 or 6, depending. And each heading level corresponds to your overall document. So L1 is usually the primary header. If you have a subsection within L1, it's L2. If you have a subsection within L2, it's L3, and so on and so forth. So make sure if you have multiple subsections, which you will inherently have in your final lit review, that you refer to the APA manual and seriation rules or seriation heading rules to make sure your subheadings and headings are in the right format. I often get the question about directly quoted material. It is absolutely appropriate that you can follow the 80-20 rule, and that denotes that 80% of your overall content should be your own wording or paraphrase material, as you would expect, and the remaining 15 to 20% of material may be directly quoted or block quoted material as necessary, making sure you adhere to APA style for congruence with block quotation formats for quotes, directly quoted material of 40 words or more. With this, if you have 15 to 20% material, I would actually expect you should have that amount of directly quoted material, because when you're presenting data, sometimes the analysis or explanation of data, the word order or the understanding and context that's presented by a certain source would be lost if you paraphrased it. So a lot of times, sometimes a secondary or tertiary source explains the data from a study the best way imaginable to capture the point you want to get across. So, of course, you want to integrate the directly quoted material to keep that context or retain that understanding. It's completely fine if you do that. You don't just want to directly quote material that is redundant. Just ensure that any direct quotations that you include in your work is significant information. The context, the word order, the understanding of that direct quote is imperative to understanding the point you're trying to get across. I also have another example of a common theme. I'm going to have to drag my screen over. Actually, I'm going to have to stop the recording to do this. Bear with me 1 second. Okay, I've changed screens. So another very common trend that I see with incoming graduate and professional writers is the overuse of that. Again, this is similar to including conversational phrases, idioms, etc. What we want to do is never overuse that. The author denoted that. The study showed that the significance of blank highlighted the importance of that blank. It's very conversational. It creates more mitigants and chunks in your writing that you can easily avoid by using some simple tools, one of which is a gerund. Let's take it back to third grade here. A gerund is a verb ending in ing. Most times you can avoid that completely by just using the next best verb in your sentence and letting that gerund let that gerund circumvent that usage. Let's look at an example here. So I'm just going to type here. So the consensus denoted that the importance is blank. So clearly we see this that here, and it throws people off. It doesn't fit into the natural flow of academic writing. So we can use a gerund, verb ending in ing, to get rid of that or to avoid it altogether. The consensus denoting the importance. So in this sentence here, denoting is our gerund. The consensus denoting the importance of blank instead of the consensus denoted that the importance is blank. So a lot of times you can take your verb preceding the irrelevant, useless, garbage that and turn it into a gerund, and we'll get rid of it altogether. It will make your sentence more succinct by moving your verb and your object closer together. So that is my tip for avoiding the overuse of that. While I'm at it, let's also address the use of author or researcher's names. You will never use the first name of a researcher or someone's research to which you're referring in your own work. It will always be author, last name, year. So in your diagnostic writing packet, you'll see author, year. That indicates author's last name only. You may refer to the author or researcher with first and last name upon first mention, but thereafter only refer to the author's last name. That's standard best practice at this level. If you are referring to a general individual, not necessarily an individual for which you're including their research ideas, a researcher or an academic, you can use their first and last name upon first mention, but we default to the same format. You will refer to them by last name only for all subsequent mentions. Let me give you a rundown of another common theme. I find that most incoming graduate and professional writers tend to gravitate to the normal conventions of in-text citations, which is a citation at the very end of your sentence, which undergrad typically uses 99.9% of the time. In graduate and professional level writing, it's quite the opposite. We typically use attributions by author's last name instead of in-text citations because it quite simply fits into the normal flow of writing. So instead of always using this type of format here, you would use author, year denotes the importance of or explains the correlation or whatever the case may be. That is, this is an example for a single author. If you had two authors, it would be author and author, year, etc. And if you had three or more authors, it would be author, et, all, year, rest of your sentence. So this is the typical format, and it's great because they serve as transitions in your content, not only as a variation in the way you cite your sources, but when you transition to a new idea, specifically at the start of a new paragraph, they work great. You can use an attribution here and then move forward. If you are providing numerical data for an attribution, instead of including it, for instance, in an in-text citation, it all belongs together. Author, year, page, blank. With an attribution, you can just follow the normal flow of your writing. Author, year, sentence content here. The end of that sentence, page X, blank. And so basically what you're doing is just extracting. You're moving your author and year to the beginning of your sentence and then moving your page number to the very end. When you are referencing specific lists, numerical data, or closely associated source material.